Alright, and welcome back. As you can see, I'm still working on the rudder. Starting to get the skeleton structure assembled. As you see me here, I'm riveting on I believe it's the brackets for the rudder hinge assembly. Um, Using the rivet gun. The one I have is a 3x rivet gun. There are folks who have said that you can get by with a 2x. It just means it doesn't have as much throw, if I understand correctly. And So it's more for the smaller rivets, and I'm sure it'll work just fine. But I just wanted to make sure I had that little bit of extra power to the rivet gun, and I know that a lot of builders do use the 3x also. So it's just a matter of making sure that you don't apply too much air pressure to the rivet gun. I think I have mine set between 20 and 30 pounds pressure. And there's actually a pressure reducer, a regulator, if you will, that you can attach to the base of the rivet gun, and you can adjust the air at the rivet gun itself, so you can keep your air pressure up around 90 pounds, 100 pounds, whatever, which is what I use for the pneumatic drill, and then regulate the pressure at the tool itself with the rivet gun, and you can do it also with a squeezer. But I just make the adjustment at the regulator on the compressor itself and set it, like I said, about 20 to 30 pounds pressure when I'm using a rivet gun. You don't want to have it too high, because then the rivet gun starts jumping and you start damaging the head of the rivet. And then also the higher the pressure, the more chance you have for the bucking bar moving, and then you start bending the I think it's called the machine side of the rivet, the bucking bar side of the rivet. And so you don't want to have too much pressure, but obviously you want to have enough that you're actually bucking. And so the other side of that, though, is that for the bucking bars themselves, I actually have a couple of tungsten bucking bars, which I highly recommend. They're a little more spendy, obviously. It's a denser metal, so they're heavier. The ones I have, I think, is a 2-inch by 1-inch by, I want to say, 4 inches. It's a little miniature, fits right in the palm of your hand. One side of it's angled slightly, but I use that thing for the majority of my bucking so far. But I've also got another one. It's again another tungsten bar. I want to say it's about an inch wide, maybe a half-inch thick, and about 4 inches long. And it's easier to get into some of the areas for the ribs and whatnot. But the kit that I got from Cleveland Auto or Aircraft Tools is it's also got a bucking bar that it includes, and it calls out specifically for the RV-14, and it's really long, and it's got a couple different angles to it, and it's narrower, I guess, but I don't know that I've seen cause to get it. I think that's something you could probably cut out of your toolkit purchase. But again, I'm only into the vertical stabilizer portion of this build, so I'm just starting still, obviously. So maybe somewhere down the line there's something that you just can't reach with anything else. But so far I've not needed it. So it's kind of up to you if you want to buy it with the kit or buy it later when you think you actually need it. And there's a couple things like that are in the kit that you may not necessarily need, at least right away. But anyway, so now I'm working on attaching the counterweight rib to the forward end of the rudder. This is the rib that will hold the lead counterweights on the forward end of the rudder. And so you attach it, and then there's a top, the piece that you see sitting right above my instruction book. That's the top rib that will go above that. For the counterweight part there, you'll have the counterweight, and then it's going to have basically a bracket that holds it in place, and the bracket has two I want to say, I believe they're called nut plates, if I recall correctly. But it's got 2 nut plates that will be riveted onto the bracket that will sit above the counterweight, and then you have 2 screws that will go through the bottom of that rib where you see the 2 holes. They'll go through there and screw into the nut plates on the bracket on the top end of the counterweight. So on the bottom of that rib, you have to dimple for the proper size there. I think that they were size 10 screws, flush mount screws. And I don't recall, I seem to think that I didn't quite have a large enough dimple, so I think I ended up dimpling as best or as close as I could, and then put the screws in and basically screwed them into the nut plates, holding the counterweight in place. And you countersink the lead weight where the holes are, where the screws go through. And so I just made sure I countersunk a little deeper, and then use the screws to kind of force the aluminum into place. They mount pretty well. I'm not entirely pleased with how it turned out, so I might see if there's a way to dimple it before I final assemble it, but I think it'll be okay. But other than that, it's just a matter of going through the rest of this. I'm working on the bottom rib here, and the assembly there, I think I discussed in an earlier video. You have the bottom rib, which has its flange, and then below that is a spacer plate, and then over the top of the flange and the spacer plate is where the rudder horn sits, and that's all on the aft end of the spar. And then on the forward end of the spar, there's a doubler plate that also gets attached there. So you have to balance all of those together and then cleat them in place, and then you rivet. So I think in that process, when I lined them up, they didn't line up as well as I wanted, so I had to final drill all the holes. And it wasn't a big change. It's not like I really changed the size of the holes. It just, there was a bit of a lip, I think, and I just had to drill it out just to make sure the rivets would go through. So now I'm just riveting in the rest of the bottom plate, or the rudder horn assembly area there. And again, when you're setting the rivets, you again want to keep the pressure relatively low, between 20 and 30 pounds pressure, and you want it to take a good 45 seconds to a minute to set each rivet. You want to do a couple blasts at a time. You don't want to just sit there and apply the rivet for 30 seconds straight. And just do quick blasts, 3 or 4 blasts at a time, and then I'll double check and make sure that the rivet's set. And if it's not, then hit it again with the rivet gun until I get the proper head size. But if you try to do it all in one shot, then you have a chance of either the bucking bar moving enough to where you start bending the rivet head, or you rivet too much. And I think my understanding is if you rivet too much, then you flatten out the rivet head enough to where it doesn't provide as much structural strength. I think that's the only thing I can think of as to what would be detrimental about riveting too much. But obviously you want to make sure that you rivet enough that it actually sets and is squeezing the material and tight enough and solid enough to where it becomes essentially one piece. So it's kind of like I said, I use the gauge quite a bit. I'm sure at one point I'll get a better eye for what looks like a good set rivet. But until I start getting comfortable with that, I continue to check myself as I go along with the rivet gauge that I got. Now, the one thing that I've mentioned before is I had an adjustable ram on my pneumatic squeezer. In the previous video, you saw me starting to use a squeezer, and then I went to the rivet gun and the bucking bar. At some point, I was having an issue with the squeezer not working correctly as far as not squeezing a size 4 rivet for whatever reason. It was a longer rivet, and like I said, it was a size 4. So I'm not sure if I just didn't have it set correctly or what, but I recall applying about 100, I think I got it up to 120 pounds pressure, and it just would not set. So I changed over to the bucking bar and the rivet gun. Obviously it worked just fine. But it takes quite a bit of time to change out the bits or the dies from the rivet dies to the dimple dies in back. It takes time to set the correct number of spacers so that when you actuate the pneumatic squeezer that you get the proper close gap. And so I think I am going to look into getting a replacement adjustable ram to where you just have to put the dies in and then you twist the ram to either close or open it up and set the gap correctly. It's a lot faster, I think. So it'd be worth the extra. I think it's a $60 piece. First, I'll see if they'll warranty out the one that bent, and if they won't, then I'll just buy a new one, I think, because it's worth the time that it saves. And overall, the toolkit that you can get from, and I'm pretty sure all the major suppliers have their own Van's kit, because Van is that prevalent of a aircraft home build kit. Go through and just make sure that it really makes sense to buy all the parts that it has in there. So there's a few in this kit that I probably didn't need to purchase and would save myself $100 or so. But for the most part, it has mostly what you need, but there's a few things that it doesn't have, and there's a few things that you don't need, I think. So anyway, with that, I'm going to let this close out here. Again, for those that continue to watch these videos, I appreciate it. If you could, hit that like button for me and help me get exposure to have other folks stumble across this that might be interested. And we'll see you next time around.